suggest a way of going forward as a kind of a working hypothesis to you. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I hope you will be open to working with it, which really does attempt to address some of these problems, because these are pretty universal problems, particularly in our churches in the first world, in the relatively urbanized first world, where most of our congregations are, broadly speaking, middle class, relatively educated, in the sense of being technically literate. Everybody knows how to read, kind of a thing. And, most importantly, very socialized into the culture around us. What do I mean by that? I mean by that well, let's take another poll. Let's just test this out. How many of you watched television in the last week? All right, let's try it a different way. How many of you did not watch television in the last week? Ooh, you win the prize. In the last 2 weeks? Don't have a television.
No, I would have watched television last year.
In the last 2 weeks? In the last 2 weeks?
Probably not. I don't think I'm looking at
All right. Right, television is kind of the central icon of the culture, isn't it? It is not Big Brother is watching us. We are watching Big Brother. That is, here is this vehicle in which the culture interprets itself to us, right in our own home, a very strategic place for the shaping of hearts and minds. And what is television about? What kinds of things do we watch and listen to on television, by and large? The news, and the news tells us stories about the world, right? So we get one kind of story, which we call the news. You think the news is the whole story about what's happening? Probably not. It is a particular angle of vision, a particular point of view on world events, which both only tells us certain stories and then only tells us certain things about the certain stories. Because that's the nature of human storytelling, is that we take certain stories and we tell them in certain ways. All right, so we get certain stories about the world. That's the news. What else do we get on television? Yes, we get certain stories about other worlds, which we might call fictional or fantastic worlds, but which have lots of correlations to life as we know that, which is why we're attracted to them. So we get stories about the world that are shaped in certain ways, and we get lots of different kinds of fictional narratives, whether it's Star Trek or any variety of other American dramas or sitcoms or Australian-produced ones of the similar variety, which are usually prime time, right? That's the prime watching hour. And there's at least one other very important kind of narrative that tends to be interspersed in between the news and the entertainment.
Commercial.
Sure. That's the commercial storytelling. Do you think that advertisements, commercials tell stories? What would be hopes and dreams? Yeah. What would be a typical commercial story that's told? Just think of anyone. Such as what? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Toys, right?
Whites. You've got to have
whites. Whites. Right? That's right. Right. And within these stories, which are really quite aggressive, aren't they? I mean, they're aggressive stories. I mean, they're telling me what I need. That's aggressive. Invasive would be perhaps even a better word.
Not only that,
yeah.
stations say they transmit at the same sound, but clearly they're louder, therefore they're being prepared louder to be aggressive and invasive.
In other words, they're kind of like Americans, right? Yep. And you know what's interesting about all that? What do you reckon? Give me a percentage of how many people in Australia you think watch television. In the 90s anyway. Just to be conservative. In the 90%. Who are watching stories which are highly manufactured. What I mean by that is the news goes through all kinds of amazing editorial processes and smoothing out and glitzing up, dressing up, so that today people say they're not really sure if they can distinguish between the news and the entertainment, so they call it infotainment. And then you've got all these very dramatically produced entertainment programs, from Star Trek to what's one of the popular soapies here in Australia?
Home and Away.
What is it?
Home and Away, Neighbours.
Home and Away, Neighbours, right? Okay. And interspersed as a regular refrain through all of this, and of course then there's sports programming and other kinds of things, but these would be the main staples. Interspersed between all of this is the most invasive, aggressive, loud, challenging type of discourse, which is not only telling us what we need, but making fantastic promises about whiter whites, and not only promising to make things whiter, and there's an interesting cultural text, but also promising that somehow that's going to help my self-esteem, my social status, my overall equation of happiness. This is television as we know it. Now, we also live in a culture, and I know this to be true of Australia because I've experienced it now a few times, and it would be generally true of the United States as well, in which people increasingly resent being told what to do, particularly by preachers. And yet, day in and day out, we're consuming the most intensely invasive, directive, aggressive kinds of storytelling, which are shaping our hearts and minds, and pocketbooks, and lifestyles, and worldviews. That's the world we live in. That's where we are. That's how we come at these stories we call the book, the Bible. And in that context, by and large, we are losing the battle for hearts and minds, even often when we think we're winning it. In other words, even if our churches are growing, are any of your churches growing? None of your churches are growing? A few of your churches are growing? Even where our churches are growing, the numbers may be increasing, but what do you think the ratio of television watching to Bible study is? Right? So let us not be fooled by this particular dramatic production we put on once a week called church, as important as that may be. That, by and large, is fighting a losing battle with all the other invasive, directive, aggressive, fantastic, seductive stories that are being told right in our own homes by the master storyteller, we call the boss. Now, the reason I say that is that, to me, that is the essence of what we call the battle for the Bible.